Hello and welcome to the MyHeritage webinar series. I'm Miriam Pierre-Louis, your host, broadcasting to you live from Eastern Massachusetts. Today we have Melanie McComb, who is also joining us live from Massachusetts for her class, Using MyHeritage DNA to Determine Immigrant Origins. Thanks to Melanie and thanks to the over 1,400 of you from these 24 countries for registering for today's live webinar. So wherever and whenever you are, glad to have you with us. Melanie's syllabus is ready for you to print or save. You can get a sneak peek of it right here on the screen. Everyone can access it from the website page for today's webinar. I've been putting the link in the chat if you're just recently arrived into the webinar. I will put it in just as soon as Melanie gets underway. Door prizes today will first include a 1-year subscription to oldnews.com by MyHeritage. I'll then give away a MyHeritage DNA test kit. And finally, I'll have a free month membership to Legacy's FamilyTreeWebinars.com to give away. To be eligible to win, you just need to be present during the door prize portion of today's live webinar. And now to introduce our speaker. Melanie McComb is a senior genealogist at American Ancestors. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree from the State University of New York at Oswego. She is an international lecturer who teaches on various topics, including colonial through 20th century American military research, genetic genealogy, Atlantic Canadian, African American, Jewish, and Irish genealogy. She is also an honorary fellow of the Massachusetts Historical Society. She has had articles published in American Ancestors magazine and 50 Plus Advocate, and she's also done a lot of articles for the Vita Brevis blog. She is a blogger on her own as well, known as the Shamrock Genealogist. Please put your virtual hands together and let's give Melanie McComb a nice warm webinar welcome. How are you, Melanie? Welcome to the webinar.
I'm doing well, Marion. How are you?
I'm great. It's always a good day when we're going to talk about DNA, one of my favorite topics.
Absolutely. One of my favorites too, and one of my areas I've definitely been getting more into lately.
And I can see your screen. It looks great. So take it away, Melanie.
Perfect. Well, good afternoon, everybody. And my class is Using MyHeritage DNA to Determine Immigrant Origins. Before we dive into some tips, we're going to talk briefly about the different types of DNA, discuss ethnicity estimates and how you can understand these percentages and what they mean, talk about how you can review your DNA matches in detail as well as their trees, and discuss some other DNA tools found on MyHeritage. So let's begin. We're going to start with discussing the different types of DNA that exist. There are 3 main types: autosomal, Y-DNA, and mitochondrial. Autosomal DNA is the most common DNA that you will likely have tested, whether you're testing through MyHeritage or any of the other companies out there like Ancestry or Family Tree DNA, 23andMe, etc. This is DNA that you inherit from both your mother's and father's side of the family and goes back to approximately your 5th great-grandparents. So that's how you can determine close cousins that you find up through about 5 or 6 generations. So autosomal DNA is really good for looking at these close cousins, and especially when you want to determine specific portions of the DNA that you inherit from both your maternal and paternal side. And this is made a lot easier if you have parents have already provided a DNA sample, or maybe you at least have a cousin from one side of the family to sort your results by. Autosomal DNA can reveal what we call continental origins, which means that sometimes we can't always go back to the specific countries that you have your family from, but at least we can get to the continent and sometimes the portions of the continent where your family is. As more and more people are testing, this is getting more and more refined and better, especially when we're trying to look at immigrant origins. The next type of DNA is Y-DNA. This is DNA that is passed in the Y chromosome that is passed down from father to son. Unlike autosomal DNA, it doesn't stop at your 5th great-grandparents. So if you are a living male descendant of a particular line that you are testing against, you can actually see your DNA matches against those within your Y-DNA line by taking a Y-DNA test. Currently, there are only a few companies that do Y-DNA testing, such as Family Tree DNA and Living DNA. Similar to Y-DNA testing, you have what's known as mitochondrial DNA. This is DNA that is specifically passed down from mother to child. However, keep in mind, though, that males do not pass it down to their children. So a male that's living today will have the mitochondrial DNA of their mother, but they will not pass down to their children. However, any children they have will inherit their mitochondrial DNA from their mother. And similar to Y-DNA, you can go back through mother to child's line, specifically going back from mother to daughter, going back beyond those 5 to 6 generations and going beyond. And as I mentioned, mitochondrial DNA is also another specialized test you can get through a company like Family Tree DNA. Now, there's also the concept of what we call a genealogical versus a genetic tree. So when we think of the genealogical tree, this is going to include all of your ancestors, all of your research that you've been doing, and all the extended relatives. But you don't inherit DNA from every single one of your ancestors. Even those that fall within about 5th great grandparent or beyond, the percentages actually go down over time. So to give you an example, here are some probability statistics to give you an idea of what you actually inherit. So from your great grandparents or 2nd great grandparents, you have a 100% probability of inheriting the DNA from them. But when you go back to your 5th great grandparent, you actually lose 5% and you only have a 95% probability. For your 8th great grandparent, especially when you're looking at those extended Y-DNA or mitochondrial tests, you have a less than 50% chance of inheriting DNA from them. And it goes down to 15% all the way to your 10th great grandparent. So when we're talking about looking at those genetic trees, keep in mind that sometimes you're not going to be able to show an actual genetic inheritance that it might have happened when you go much further back. Now let's talk about looking at what we call the ethnicity estimates, which look into where your family may have come from. The way ethnicity estimates work is they are based on what we call reference panels, which means that in order to test your DNA against certain populations, we have to gather DNA from those populations that have stayed in a specific area. And specifically, these are people that have documented ancestry and have stayed there over many, many generations. So let's say you had Italian ancestry. You would want to have a reference panel of people staying in Italy for a very long time, and specifically maybe even certain regions to compare it against, because this is going to show them as a very steady control when you're trying to show approximately what percentage you might have inherited from other people that are in Italy. Now, each company that does DNA testing has their own reference panels and has their own sets of samples. So that's why you see that the ethnicity percentages vary from company to company, is because they're using different data. Now, there are ways you can tell what groups that you might fall into, and these are based on different algorithms that are developed by each of the testing companies. And you might find that you might start to be put in a more broader region, so that continental regions, and then over time it starts to then maybe go into more sub-communities, or what MyHeritage calls genetic groups. MyHeritage has over 2,100 genetic groups, and this is as of December of 2020, and it's on their website, so you can see where this is. So you can see that there is a lot more representation in terms of North and West European, English, Scandinavian, Irish, Iberian, Nigerian, Greek, etc., and the numbers start to go down. So if you are in a group where you may not be as widely represented, it's possible that that's why your ethnicity group estimate is maybe a little bit more broader, because they don't have enough people in those samples. So for example, if you were of Inuit ethnicity, for example, there's only really one person they're comparing against right now. So as more and more people get added to that group, it's going to start to refine to compare against. These ethnicity timeframes that we're looking at are looking at people roughly within about 500 to 1,000 years ago. And some of the different companies out there can fluctuate within the different timeframes that they're using. So just keep in mind that they're looking over relatively recent ancestry, especially when we're looking at autosomal DNA. And that's really the focus of these ethnicity estimates, is that this is having to do with your autosomal DNA, and that's what MyHeritage measures. So let's give you some examples of looking at ethnicity estimates. This is actually my ethnicity estimates on MyHeritage, where it shows that I am over 55% Irish, Scottish, and Welsh with one genetic group. I am 29.6% Ashkenazi Jewish with 6 genetic groups, and about 14.6 in 3 other ethnicities. So this is really your high-level estimate that shows up. And on the screen, you can actually click on View Full Estimate to get more of a detailed breakdown. So first you get here is, this is the summary. So it actually breaks down that other regions was actually showing I have 8.6% Baltic, 5.2% Greek and South Italian, and 0.8% Iberian. And the way the ethnicity estimates are also set up is that they are color-coded and they coordinate with different areas of the map on the right-hand side. So I can see my Irish is concentrated around Ireland. I also have my Ashkenazi Jewish and a little bit of the overlay of the Baltics right on top of it. And then I have down more of the Iberian and the Greek towards the very bottom. As you drill into your result is when you can actually see these genetic groups. So for example, there's not really a very detailed subgroup for the Irish, Scottish, and Welsh. It really just reads as Ireland, North Ireland, Scotland, and England. But under my Ashkenazi Jewish, I actually have several groups that even go into specific countries. And they start to tell me that I have, more Polish, Lithuania, Ukraine, Belarus, Russia, etc. that come up. And you'll see more detailed maps where it's circling around the different areas. So my Ashkenazi Jewish is showing a lot more detailed in the yellow on the right-hand side. And sometimes you might have additional genetic groups, and there's a little pop-up box at the end of it where you can click. So this is where it's saying that it's not tied directly to a specific ethnicity that I have, but I am showing that I still do have some genetic groups in the US, Canada, and Australia as well, which makes sense given what I know about my family history. So some takeaways on the ethnicity estimates is that these results are going to differ across companies due to the data being used, the different algorithms, and even the reporting timeframes that are reporting this data. It's going to point to these areas of recent ancestry. So anything more distant, you might need a more specialized test like a Y DNA or mitochondrial. And sometimes it can be a little misleading when you're thinking about they could be very broad or more distant regions. And they're constantly changing. So you're always going to see that there are updates being made over time, and you may see that there is a new ethnicity update at a company you test at. So now let's talk about looking at specifically DNA matches and learn how more to review these. So this is an example of what a DNA match might look like from a cousin of mine's perspective, where I show up as approximately with my picture, if I upload it, my name. It even includes like an age estimate if you include that information, and what country you're from and living in. Your estimated relationship to that person is listed. So according to this cousin, I'm approximately a first cousin once removed, or up to a second cousin once removed. So it's going to give you a range of possible relationships. It shows that I share over 300 centimorgans of DNA with them. Number of shared segments is 8, and with the largest segment being 158. And on each of the DNA matches, you have the ability to contact someone. So I also want to speak briefly about how DNA can really help us, because DNA is definitely very underutilized in our genealogy research, but it's really helping to break open a lot of brick walls for people, especially for anybody that is trying to identify unknown parents or grandparents or distant ancestry, helping to find any more of these missing relatives, and can really help you test your genealogy research. So think of it like a hypothesis that of your genealogy research. Use the science to see if what you found is correct based on what you had already discovered. And you might be able to use this to further identify more origins. But you can't use DNA alone by itself. You need to use genealogy research with it. It's another tool. So some things to keep in mind, though, is looking at your family tree, is that you want to make sure that in your family tree that you include all of your earliest known ancestors to date that are included. Because this is going to help to make sure that if anybody is reviewing your family tree, that they know exactly what you know at that point. So if you're having your earliest known ancestors, you want to have names, dates, and locations. And even if you have to do an estimate on a date, it still will help. Any of the vital record events, births, marriages, and deaths should also be included with any dates and locations, even if it's estimates, just to help people understand, especially if there were any migration patterns that happened. And you also want to make sure you include all locations where they might have lived or moved to, because that could have a big impact on, does somebody have a similar pattern that they're following in their family tree? For example, I have a lot of family in my father's side that traveled from Ireland to Prince Edward Island, Canada, before eventually coming to the United States. So seeing other people that have similar patterns may suggest a stronger connection than ones that don't. It's also really important that you're including all the children or siblings in each generation. We sometimes like to get into tunnel vision where we're only looking at our direct ancestors, but it's helpful to have everybody accounted for, because especially with DNA, you're hoping to pick up descendants of those other relatives in your tree. And sometimes that could be what's needed to confirm another generation back. And even if you have to include a hypothetical relative in there, at least it gives you something to test. So there's some different ways you want to evaluate your tree, including if you have any gaps or brick walls. So identifying where you might be missing some information, and if you can potentially even fill that in with a hypothetical ancestor. Sometimes what I'll even do is I'll even at least list maybe a father's name with the last name and a circa birth date and location if I know a possibility, just to have something to go off of. So if I at least know the country or maybe even the continent, at least something to narrow down. And you also want to look at things like naming conventions, because a lot of times the names of children are going to follow traditional naming patterns based on the particular person's country's culture that they're using. Now, not every family is going to use these naming conventions, but it still might give you a clue as to what the names possibly could be that you want to look for. So here's an example of an Irish naming convention. So the firstborn son is named after the father's father. The secondborn son is then named after the mother's father. Then the thirdborn son is named after the father. And then it goes on and going in even to the brothers as well. Versus on the daughter's side, it's very similar, only in this time, the firstborn daughter goes after the mother's mother, second is the father's mother, and then the third after the mother. So it's similar, but it kind of switches. So you're really looking at, are they following based on the sex of the parent that they're following? So the fathers are going to go after the father's line first, or versus the daughters are going to go after the mother's line first. So keep in mind that you want to make sure you have a really well-researched tree to help you find any clues or commonalities in your match's tree, because these are going to be things that you're going to pick up on, and we're going to show you how to look at other people's trees. When you're working with your matches, you want to look at different things in common. You want to look at possible surnames in common, and even down to specific ancestors as well. Sometimes you might notice that a certain couple keeps coming up over and over again, and that might suggest that potentially they might be a shared ancestor with you and other matches. Now, and especially this is really important if you're dealing with any naming conventions, such as in a lot of the Nordic countries like Norway or Sweden or elsewhere, where they're using more patronymic naming conventions, where then it's going to be important that you're paying attention to the locations in common. Sometimes what I like to do with families in those communities is I'm looking for specific parishes and townlands that repeat over and over again as a place that I would start to adopt to look into further. And I like to build a relationship with my matches. So I like to contact them and ask questions and try to get to know them a lot to find out what they might know, because you never know if they might have a piece of information that really could help you greatly go back further. So you want to build that relationship slowly and find ways to work together and share information. I like to share photographs or stories or other things I might have learned that perhaps may not be publicly available. And then, of course, we always want to make sure we're using genealogical records to confirm what we're seeing in our matches as well. And as new findings are coming up in your DNA, you want to then find the record trail that corresponds with them as well to make sure you're on the right path. So when we're looking into our matches, we want to do different types of searches. So one type of search we might do is searching by ancestral surname. When you're at the top of your DNA matches list, you're going to see an option for a magnifying glass. You want to click on that, and then a little box is going to come up showing the name or ancestral surname. So this is where you can actually search on a surname that is in your tree that you are researching further. So in this example, I searched on my maiden name, which is Doherty. And what happens is that when you go through your match list, any ancestral surnames that are in your MyHeritage tree that are listed, including the ones you searched on, they're going to show up in this purple font, and they're going to stick out to you on each of the different matches. So I could see that this match that's a estimated third cousin has both Doherty and Kelly ancestral surnames in their tree. So that may help me to kind of figure out I might have two potential branches I have to look at. Versus this other match down here, which is more of a fifth to fourth cousin, is they only have Doherty as one surname. So potentially that person might be more valuable to look specifically on the Doherty line because I may not have another possibility that shows up based on this initial review. So we're going to do a few case studies throughout this presentation to show you how to apply some of these skills. We're going to start off with the first case study for my second great-grandmother, Sarah Elizabeth Flynn. She was born in Ireland about 1834, and as I mentioned, she was one of those that had went to Prince Edward Island. She had married my second great-grandfather, Owen Doherty, in 1853 in the town of Vernon River, Queens County, Prince Edward Island. They had various children born between 1854 and 1875. In 1881 census, her potential mother, Bridget, age 82, had lived with Sarah and her family. And we know that she had died after 1911 in Prince Edward Island. However, her death was not found, so I was not able to find a death record to confirm her parents and origins as well. So if we want to search for potentially the origins of her family, the Flynns, we want to go into our match list and search by ancestral surname. So I'm going to search on Flynn, and I see that there are 86 matches that have Flynn. And then I want to go through the individual matches to, again, look for surnames in common. So this includes Flynn. And I also want to see if they have the ancestral place in common. In this case, they mention Ireland, which is where we know their family's from. This person is an estimated parent's fourth cousin. And they're saying that also because my father had also tested his DNA. So when we review the DNA match, we start to get a little more detail about this person. So we see that they have 12.1 centimorgans of DNA shared over one shared segment. So that gives you a nice long stretch. And the estimated relationships are down at the bottom, in which they give the probability. So if this person could be my parents, my father's fourth cousin, there's about a almost 35% probability that our most recent common ancestor that's shared would be fourth great grandparents, which would be great because we'd be getting much closer. Now, it is possible that it could be a fifth cousin, which also would be fourth great grandparents. And as you go on, possibly into fifth great grandparents as you go into sixth cousins. But the probability is going down. So MyHeritage is showing you the specific probabilities of that relationship. Further, when you go down the list on your DNA matches, in addition to seeing the surname Flynn, if anybody in their tree is identified by name, they'll also be included. So I can see this DNA match has a great-grandmother named Bridget or Biddy Flynn. Their second great-grandfather is a Patrick Flynn, and they have a couple other Flynns that are identified as direct ancestors going back 5 or 6 generations. So that is another helpful tool because potentially you might identify someone very quickly by going through their match list and knowing that, hey, I know that name, and you can go and find them in your tree. There also are maps that are shared. Now, this match I thought was really interesting because they were based out of Ireland. And that's something that I like to look for, is when a match that you are interested in a specific country lives in the country of interest, because it's potential that if they've always lived in that country of interest, then maybe that match is stronger on certain lines, and maybe they haven't moved very far from where the family was from. So that might help you when instead of you're dealing with a lot of immigrants that have come over and their families where there could be multiple branches that you're examining further, and you're trying to figure out if they've identified the origins correctly. So in this case, this match is showing that in the dark gray here, that they have more around the Sligo area and possibly near Leitrim. And then my family is more over here, closer to like County Louth and Monaghan. You also want to review what's known as shared DNA matches. So if a DNA match is shared with anybody else in common, and these usually go out to about your 5th or 6th cousins or so, this can be really helpful because this tells me that this DNA match is a match to my father, who also tested, and that this match is probably a fifth cousin to him. And it also shows this other match that is probably a parent's 4th cousin to me is actually their 2nd cousin. So that's a really helpful tool to show you some close relationships when you're identifying them. Because if you can determine some of these shared matches out first, that might be helpful to determining which line you are researching. Let's talk a little bit about the different trees now. So there are different tips for reviewing your trees. And again, we want to make sure that we're looking at these DNA matches with trees, listing all their ancestors with names, dates, and locations to narrow down how you're related. Not every tree is going to be as complete as yours. You might find that some trees are very sparse, or what we call like a very shallow tree. So keep in mind that every tree is going to have its own format, and know that not everybody keeps their tree online. They may have it on paper or on a computer software program as well. And very important that you take the tree as a hint, but verify all documentation against your sources. I also want to say, pay attention to the names of the trees that people create. Sometimes you get a surname or a location in them that could really be helpful with looking at maybe what their focus is. So we're going to go back to our Flynn example here. And on this DNA match, we're going to find that they have, where they had Bridget Biddy Lynn, and her father is Patrick Flynn, 1829 to 1859. So pretty close age-wise to where my 2nd great-grandmother would be. And we see that there's not much information known on their father. So that's where we want to start our search. So with Patrick Flynn, when I click into him, I see that there is a profile page where I can learn more. And I don't have a lot of details here. I basically see a birth and death date. I see some information on their brothers and some spouses, but not a lot of locations. And I even checked the sources to see if there's anything listed, and there was very sparse. But you actually can click research this person to find out more. Because what that's going to do is it's going to basically bring up a search in MyHeritage to actually search all their collections. And this could include like things like vital records, census records, and other items. It's also include MyHeritage trees and also family search trees that also were shared. So I noticed by just doing this quick little search of Patrick Flynn, born 1829 to 1889, and I know that they were married going back here to a Margaret Foley, 1826 to 1895, I see that this profile is actually on family search, family tree. And here I actually have some more specifics. So here I have that Patrick had died in Drumlara in Mohill County, Leitrim, Ireland, and his parents were identified. And something I thought was also interesting was that not only do we have his parents, but that his mother's Bridget Flynn was born Bohan. Bohan actually came up earlier in the tree on the match's other side of the family. So potentially maybe they have a shared ancestor going way back. So I thought that was interesting. And you can actually go to view record to see the index entry for what's here. And I even see down to a marriage date and location and other information. So if I wanted to, I could then go to the family search tree and look at the sources that were assigned to find out more. So in summary, while this is only one match, it does show you a possibility. So this one DNA match, who actually lives in Ireland, has a Flynn line with origins going back to County Leitrim. We're going to obviously need a lot more research needed to confirm if this location is correct, but given some of the things that we're starting to find, there might be something more to looking into if there could be something to this particular line, and if Charles Flynn could be a potential parent or some other relative to my Sarah. Another technique I like to use is also to, besides looking at candidates of parents, is also to look for possible siblings of your ancestor. Sometimes we just don't have enough information to have a possible lead on a parent, so we want to look for those matches for a lead on a sibling and trace those lines as far back as we can, especially where there is a shared surname and location. Our next case study is my third great grandfather, James McKenna. He was born in Ireland in 1814. He had married Rose Kelly, probably in Ireland before 1842, when their first daughter was born in Mary. And we had all these children born between 1842 and 1860, and he died in 1860 in Prince Edward Island. He had died before we start having vital records, where there would be a list of names of parents and locations. So DNA was definitely something to turn to. So we repeat our process. We do a search by ancestral surnames. In this case, I'm going to search on McKenna. And you'll notice that there are ways when you search on these names, as long as you don't do like an exact search on names, there are ways you can do sound X with them. So now I'm going to review my DNA matches for any ancestral places in common. So this match is my parents' fourth cousin, and they have McKenna as a surname, and their ancestral places include Ireland and United Kingdom. So far, so good. I then review the match. I see that they have 21.1 centimorgans over 2 segments, with the largest segment being 14.9 centimorgans, so a fairly long stretch. And I see the possible relationships, with the highest being a parent's fourth cousin at 42%, with the most recent common ancestors being fourth great grandparents. I then want to look into their tree to see where the McKennas are starting to show up. And I noticed it was really only on one side of the family was the McKennas, so it looks like it was on the mother's side. And here we have a Mary C. McKenna, born 1852, died 1935, a daughter of a John McKenna and Bridget. I go into her profile to learn more. Now, in this case, we have some specific areas where she's from. We notice that she is born in 1852 in the town of Daravoy in Carrickrow in Emmyvale County, Monaghan. And she had died in Carrickrow and County Monaghan as well, but in the different town in Killibreen. So that's really good that we have some specifics. So we still want to research them a little further to see if we find anybody else with this name. Now, another way you can also do it too is because we have some specifics is looking at the shared DNA matches. So I did a review of the shared DNA matches as well to see if anybody else might have a McKenna going back to those same parts of Ireland to see if that could be a possible place of origin. I see that I have several cousins listed on the left-hand side, and in this case, the fifth cousin is the third cousin's son to this contact, and you have another one that's a fifth cousin, third cousin's son as well. So we have a few possibilities here that are shared in common with both me and that match. So I looked at this other match and I noticed that they had an older Mary McKenna that showed up that was also married to a trainer. And they're in a different part of Monaghan. They're actually in Tony Finnegan in Killaloe, and they're born 1827. So much earlier and probably closer to the generation that I'm interested in. So we click into the profile a little further. And one thing we also want to do is even map out the different towns. So something I like to do what I call a sanity check is to review 2 locations within a particular county of a country I'm interested in, just to see is the distance reasonable where there could be possible relatives connected. And I saw that between the town of Derevoy and Tony Finnegan, it's only about a 10-minute drive today. So even if we start going into older means of transportation, like such as a horse and buggy, for example, or etc., that it is definitely reasonable that you could have had family move from possibly down to the south, more north over time. Now, I also searched for marriage records. Specifically, I was going through marriage records through the Catholic parish registers through the National Library of Ireland. So I actually checked a few indexes. And knowing that they possibly lived in County Monaghan, I did find a good match for James and Rose Kelly. I found a Jacobus McKenna, which is Latin for James, who married a Rosa Kelly on June 23rd, 1839. Both parties were of the civil parish of Donnoch in County Monaghan, Ireland. I also found the Mary McKenna that I saw noted here also in the records. She had married Patricio, which is Latin for Patrick, trainer, on February 14th, 1854. They also were of the civil parish of Donnoch, with their residence typically being in Glasgow. And as I started to put all this together, I realized that a lot of these townlands were all within the civil parish of Donnoch. So that definitely seems like I had found the right location. So in a summary, I had shown that the McKenna DNA matches on MyHeritage had ties back to County Monaghan, Ireland, with the ancestors living in the civil parish of Donnoch. The marriage record found between James McKenna and Rose Kelly in 1839 was found in the parish of Donnoch, so in the right location. And then we also found some other possible matches here. So, and that should actually say Mary McKenna. So a possible sister, Mary McKenna, was identified through a DNA match, and she had also married in the same parish. So some follow-ups that we might want to look into is if we're trying to see if we can identify the father, for example, of this family, we may want to look into identifying other descendants of the other couple to see if we could find any more evidence, such as that Mary McKenna and Patrick Trainer. And I also found a possible match of a sister, Mary Kelly, as well in there too. So if we also looked at the Rose Kelly side, we also could looking into additional descendants needed on that end as well. Now, I mentioned that there might be a concept known as shallow trees, in which there might be a small amount of people that are listed. So where usually someone might only include themselves, their parents, and maybe their grandparents, where there's very limited information. You've probably seen lots of trees like this. And sometimes there might be what we call a partial shallow tree, where one side just has significantly more information than the other. So you might find that there's one side that only has up to a certain generation and the rest is fully built out, possibly showing that maybe where they were getting brick walled. So what I recommend you do is you research the profiles with limited information as much as you can, because sometimes you can actually pick up where they left off. So here's a good example of what a shallow tree might look like, where this is the DNA match showing their parents with a father Goldschmied and a mother Romer for the surname. And that's all we know. So we'd have to probably contact them to maybe get a little more information, but at least we have an idea of, if we found maybe a location of where we're starting from, where a Goldschmied might have married a Romer. That could definitely help us lead to potential matches going back on their parents. Our third case study we're going to do is on my third great grandfather, Feivel Goldschmied. He was born about 1840 in the Russian Empire. He had married Rebecca, and we don't know her maiden name. Their only child that I know of is my second great grandmother, Haya, who Americanized her name to Clara when she immigrated to the United States, and she was born in 1870. Now, the only location we possibly have is really based on information from Haya's immigration details, including her passenger manifest and even other naturalization petitions that show that Feivel may have died after May 7th, 1911, possibly in Foxany, Varantia, Romania. And this is just based on that immigration date where we last saw that he was listed. So again, we want to go back and search by our ancestral surnames. So in this case, I'm going to go and look at Goldschmied. Now, given obviously different Eastern European names, you might want to try different variants like Goldschmied, Goldschmidt. They actually Americanized it to Goldman later on, so there could be lots of variants you need to try. But I did find that I had at least 5 matches on Goldschmied, so I went forward with this. So then I want to review the DNA match list for any common ancestral places if the country is known. Now, since I did have some information that their daughter was at least last from Romania, it was promising that this match had Goldschmied and Romania as a location. Now, this match actually is from Hungary in this case, which is not overly far, but still a different country. And we want to review that match to get a little more detail. So we look at the DNA match for possible relationships. We see it shares about 19.9 centimorgans over 3 segments, and that this person is likely a 5th cousin to me, with the most recent common ancestors being 4th great grandparents. I then go down to their shared ancestral surnames, and they listed that their grandmother was a Margaret Goldschmied. And as I go down to the shared ancestral places, one of those places in common is Romania. So number 2, this is representing my tree, the light gray here. And the far right is indicating where they have family from. Now, this doesn't mean that it's on the branch that I'm researching. It just means that somewhere in their family tree, they have it. And it's actually on the other side of their family. They had family that was living in Arid, Romania. And as you scroll down within the locations, they even show you specifics down on the locations and what surnames. And as I scroll through the ones in Arid, Romania, none of them were Goldschmied. They were for a whole nother surname, which seemed to indicate that maybe that was a different branch of where the family came from. Now, this is one example of what I call a partially shallow tree, in this that on their father's side, they only built out maybe a little bit. They had maybe their father was living, so they're noted as private. And then we have listed their grandfather and their grandmother. And here is Margaret, who was born in 1909. Once we click into Margaret, we can get a little information, and we see that she is from MyHeritage, and that is somewhere in Hungary, and which would make sense given the match was in Hungary as well. So we want to do a search to see if we could find any potential matches on a Margaret, especially since she has a very specific birth date, potentially coming from some other record, maybe off of a death record or some other record. So with doing those searches, when you're going through the collections, you may need to dig into more of the vital records and the other trees to see if you could find a good potential hit. And I wasn't finding a direct hit, so this one might take a little more digging to learn more about. And I even added the spouse's name as well to get a little more clues. So I decided, let's look at another match and see if we get any more hits that might be more promising. And I found this match here, in which they also had a Goldschmied, and they also had Romania in the ancestral places. This person is an estimated 4th cousin's daughter. So we reviewed them. They have 12.9 centimorgans of 2 segments, and the probability is about 35.6%, and most recent common ancestor might be a third great grandparent. So we're getting a little bit closer with this match, which is good. The shared ancestral surnames, we see that their direct ancestor going back 7 generations, there was a Therese Goldschmied that was listed. And as we scroll down, we can even see the areas of where they are. So again, the light gray is going to be you. So this is mine in Foxany. And she's showing she has all these different places in the dark gray that are coming up in Romania. So she seems to have a lot more around this area and even getting into Hungary as well, showing it's right on the border. So that very much could show why there could be a connection back to having ancestry with someone in Romania, possibly coming from Hungary. So I look into their tree and I find Therese Goldschmied, and she's the mother of a Joanna Schwartz. And we even see the town that she was born in, Joanna, which is Naganisa. And we see that she had married an Albert Zerkowitz. And so we want to look more on Therese, so we click into her profile. And by doing that, I actually found a number of different trees all had a Therese that had married a Henrik Schwartz. And in this case, they had a very specific location in mind in Hungary. And this was showing that she was from Varpalota in Veszprém, and that she had died in Veszprém in 1870. So this helped to really fill out a little more details on potentially her life that maybe we didn't have from that other tree. As I was going through even the vital records, I also came across Therese Goldschmied and her husband Henrik being named in an index record of a vital record of their son, Dr. Josef Schwartz, who would marry in Hungary in 1895. And at the very bottom of this index record, it shows that they was from Varpalota, and even specifically noted that the groom was born in Varpalota. So that showed that there was some connection there based on people's trees having a direct connection back to a source. And this source is something that's been microfilmed in Family Search, and you can also find this on JewishGen as well. So our case study summary shows that there are at least 2 Goldschmied DNA matches that have ties to Hungary. What might be helpful is doing mitochondrial DNA on Feiwel's daughter Haya's line to identify potential surnames for Feiwel's wife Rebecca. And that's something that I'm trying to work on now, is going through that direct maternal line, as I'm a direct maternal descendant of Haya. So that might help reveal maybe some potential family names of who Rebecca might have been, and putting them in proximity to other Goldschmieds. And we definitely need some more research in the Romanian records to maybe identify any other children or any other vital records that are needed, as not a lot of these are available online. We're now going to round out this class with talking about some of the different other tools on MyHeritage. There are several tools, including DNA labels, a theory of family relativity, searching genetic groups, chromosome browser, and auto clusters. So I like to use the DNA labeling as a way to keep track of my matches. So when you're in an individual match, if you click on this little paper icon here next to the star, it will actually open up a box where if you have pre-existing labels that you have created, you can actually assign one or multiple to that DNA match. What I like to recommend doing is using DNA labels as a way to label either a side of the family, maternal, knowing that I may have more work to do on that side, or if I have down to specific surnames, like on my father's side, I have Doherty and Rooney. Now, if you wanted to create a new label, you also can do that as well. And when I do that, it's going to ask you for a label name. You have 100 characters, and then you actually assign one of the colors that's available for you to use. So there is a finite amount of labels that you can use based on the number of colors available. And then when you do that, you click Save. Once I do that, I can then go back into that little sheet of paper, click which one I want to identify on, and let's say I wanted to click off on Flynn and click Apply. It's going to then add that little brown dot. And I actually added another one as well too. I added a Flynn and a Rooney here, which you can see on the left-hand side. And if you want to filter on specific matches, for example, you can actually use the filters, go to your labels, and check off which ones you want to look at, and your match list will actually update. So this can be really helpful when you're identifying what I call a cluster of DNA matches that you're pursuing, but you don't want to go through the list manually. And once I've sorted those matches, in this case Flynn, I only pull up those that I filtered on. In this case, only one match that I've assigned it to. Another feature is called the theory of family relativity. And if any of you have used other companies like Ancestry, which has through lines, it's very much the same idea. It is basically a way of testing a theory of how you're related to your DNA matches. So I can see that this particular match who's based out of Canada, if there is a theory of family relativity, you can actually use your filters to filter on if they have this. And they will even tell you in your DNA match preview if there's a theory. So according to this particular match is supposed to be my third cousin according to the theory of family relativity. And it says that I have plus 3 more theories. I can then click on View Theory to see these possibilities. And with this, it's actually shown that I have 4 paths of how I'm related. And sometimes these paths are going to be based on the tree of just the DNA match, or it could be based on multiple trees in this case. So in this example, it's actually listing that we both have Owen Doherty and Sarah Flynn in both of our trees. But if I went to click on another path, it gets a little more detailed. So in this case, it shows that, yes, they have Owen Doherty and Sarah Flynn, and we find an exact match on Joseph Doherty, my great-grandfather, as being that connection, and that they might go through a different connection of that line. So they basically find the match percentage and give you a confidence level. Now, if I wanted to use another feature, I may want to look at searching what are those genetic groups that we talked about, those 2,100 or so. So you can actually, under your different filters available under your DNA matches, you can actually search your all genetic groups and actually select sometimes even down to specific countries you're interested in. So sometimes it could be a little overwhelming, and maybe we have an idea of what ethnicity we're connected with, so we can search on that. So let's say I wanted to search on just my Irish. I could just type in Ireland, and then it's going to give me different drop-down values available from those lists of regions. So I'm going to pick the one most relevant in this case, but sometimes you can get into more specifics as these go on. So this is going to help to really filter out my matches. So this was actually going to remove all my Eastern European, my Baltics, and other countries that are not going to be relevant. So it definitely makes it a lot easier to work off of. Now, MyHeritage also has a chromosome browser, which is really helpful to visualize what you actually inherit DNA matches at a chromosomal level, and even getting down to seeing individual segments that you share with DNA matches. So this is actually found under the DNA Tools feature under the DNA tab, and you can see the chromosome browser is right in the center. Once you're in here, you can select up to 7 of your DNA matches to view their shared segments. So let's say I just pulled in 7 different matches, and they're all different amounts of DNA shared and number of segments, and you'll see that each of the different bars down below is going to represent a different DNA match. So this is obviously one of my closer matches here, which I believe is my father right here in the red. And then I have this like brown match here, which is showing that there is a certain amount of DNA shared on chromosome 1 that seems to go to the same points that my father shares. So when you see those long stretches that are matched up to certain areas in comparison to maybe another match, that shows you that there is likely a common ancestor that's shared in common. And we can see here, even on this little green one, that they also share a portion of DNA with my father, but not with the brown. So we're not at the point of what we call triangulation, where we have at least 3 or more matches to look at that share the same segments. So this can also give you really good clues if you're getting stuck with looking at maybe names and locations, but trying to identify a cluster where DNA is shared in common. Another feature you also can use is what's known as auto clusters. in which it is a tool that actually helps generate a number of clusters based on different matches that descend from the same common ancestor. So each cluster or group is a different color. And this is a file that MyHeritage generates and sends it to your email when it's ready, as it's quite large. So what you want to do is you want to go to the DNA Tools page and go to the Auto Clusters part. And when you click Explore, it'll go through and walk you through how to generate it. And then you basically will wait, get an email, and I think a couple hours later, it's ready. And this is a sample of what it looks like. So you can see that there are 17 different clusters, and they have varying number of members included here. So this can give you an idea that those that are in red are going to share a common ancestor that is separate from the ones in orange or yellow, etc., and so on. So in review of this presentation, keep in mind that your ethnicity estimates are only what we say it is. It's an estimate. It's only a clue to help you understand those origins, but can really help identify, especially if you have a certain ethnicity that may not have been expected or something that is a little bit different than your other part of your ancestry. That can be very valuable to actually sort out your matches. So for example, in my case, I have my father's side is Irish and my mother's side is Eastern European and Jewish. So that makes it a lot easier to figure out what matches are where because they are so distinct. But sometimes you have very similar estimates. And that's why it's helpful to have a very well-researched and deep family tree going out and all those branches, including the siblings and the children's children, going all the way down to living people. Because that's going to give you a much better idea of identifying matches that have the same names and locations that show up and figure out how they're related to you. You'll find that using a lot of these different tools that you do need to be very thorough with your research and sometimes be a little creative with how you may review your matches and how you find out more information on them. So you have to think about different ways on how to figure out a family tree, even for living people, just to figure out the next steps to go backwards. But always make sure you're confirming your records with genealogy records because sometimes the DNA is only just a theory and doesn't really mean anything until you have some genealogy to also back up what you're seeing. So always have a paper trail that goes along with it to test your theory. I also do DNA consultations, so if you're ever interested in booking a consultation with a genealogist such as myself, you can go to americanancestors.org/expert-help/consultations, or you can scan the QR code on the screen with your QR reader. There's also a link in today's handout. I'll now turn over to some questions.
Thank you, Melanie. That was great. Lots of great strategies, lots of great resources for how we can look at our DNA. I'm going to take back the controls and we're going to do some announcements and door prizes, and then we'll bring Melanie back on for Q&A. If you have a question for Melanie, please go ahead and put it in your question panel, and then I can ask her during the Q&A section. Barb is saying great information. So I agree. That was wonderful. Let's see here. If you would like to watch some more MyHeritage webinars, if you have a subscription already and you want to dive into specific parts of MyHeritage, or you're not familiar with MyHeritage and you want to learn more about it, go to familytreewebinars.com/MyHeritage. Lots of webinars there, over 300 webinars on MyHeritage and its products and all the different things you can do with MyHeritage. So check that out. Our next MyHeritage webinar is going to be using MyHeritage for family history research in Australia, and that is by Shauna Hicks, and one of the most popular Australian genealogists. So you'll definitely, if you're down under, you definitely want to watch this. I know it's a tough time, and it's going to be early morning in Australia, but the replay will be available if you can't get up that early. But be on the lookout for that. Melanie has one more webinar in the Legacy Library already. This is talking about Prince Edward Island repositories and records. So if you have any Prince Edward Island ancestry, you'll definitely want to check that out. You can get directly to her webinars at familytreewebinars.com/Melanie McComb. Today's webinar will also be found there later if you want to search that way. All right, let's give out some door prizes. Our first door prize is a subscription to oldnews.com. This is the newspaper subscription site offered by MyHeritage. It is a separate subscription from the MyHeritage subscription unless you have an Omni plan. There are newspapers still included in a regular MyHeritage subscription, but the oldnews.com is a bigger, more comprehensive site, and that's where they're going to be putting all the new newspaper subscriptions in the future. So we're going to go to our live audience here, and we're going to pick somebody, and that is going to go out to Barbara Stobner. So congratulations, Barbara. I will be sending you an email later with how you can get your prize. And our next door prize is a MyHeritage DNA kit, and that seems absolutely perfect for today's topic. So if you haven't tested yourself, or maybe there's some other family member or friend that you want to get tested, this will be the perfect thing to start exploring all those ethnicity estimates and exploring the matches the way Melanie was showing you today. And let's see, that's going to go out to Neil Warber. So congratulations, Neil. All right, got your name down. And then our last door prize is one free month at familytreewebinars.com. Now, familytreewebinars.com is the biggest, bestest genealogy education site out there. And there are over 2,000 classes for you to learn whatever topic is interesting you. You can learn about DNA, you can learn about methodology, places all around the world. You can dive into AI, artificial intelligence. That's the new thing that genealogists are learning to use. All right, so let's go to our audience here and pick somebody for that, and that is going to go out to Toby Marquette. So congratulations, Toby. All right, so for Barbara, Neil, and Toby, just be on the lookout for an email from me, and then I will be sending you information on how you can get those prizes. If you don't see the email, please do check your spam folder. And we'd welcome any of you to become a Legacy Family Tree Webinars member so you can have access to classes all the time. Oh, here, let me put that out. There's American Ancestors that I just shared their link in as Legacy Family Tree Webinars. Now, Melanie had talked about their offering a promo, so I'm going to share that as well. So, American Ancestors, they're offering $25 off. And so just know for that last promo that I just gave out, that's for the American Ancestors site. It's not for MyHeritage and it's not for Legacy. That's the August 24 coupon code is for the AmericanAncestor.org site. All right. And I think that covers everything there. Let me give you the link to Melanie's. And I'm also going to share the handout for today. Everyone can access the handout today because it's a MyHeritage webinar. So I'll put that in the chat. So if there's anybody here who hasn't gotten that yet, you can go grab that now. All right, let's bring Melanie back on. We've got a couple questions here. Let's see. Anita has researched her family history back 8, 9, 10 generations. And she knows that she is German, Swiss, and British. But MyHeritage DNA is telling her that she's 46% Scandinavian. So how does she make sense of that?
So depending on the percentages that are used for Scandinavian, you're going to find that there could be some patterns going back. Now, I do know that when you look at German ancestry specifically, it is very much a recent type of ancestry, so you do get a conglomerate from some of the other regions that do show up. So it's a little hard to say specifically what might be going on, but it's possible that there was just some migration going on at the time when they were comparing it. And you might find that there might not be as many people that have tested German in Swiss. So finding more people that have tested over time may eventually change that percentage. So, I would say if you've definitely found, more records, that verify your ancestry, just use it with a grain of salt, what you found there. But it's just that it's trying to read a lot of the Northern European and just not detailed enough yet.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. All right, let's see here. So Stephen wants to know, what if all your surnames are changed names? So I am imagining he's, potentially he's like Eastern European Jewish. They came to the United States, changed their names, anglicized their name. They don't have to be Eastern European. They could be from anywhere. But, how do you deal with DNA when you're talking about changed names, especially when you're looking at your matches?
Sure. So it's really helpful that if you're dealing with a name being changed after immigration, that you are tracking down all the relevant immigration records that tell you what the original name was. And also pay attention to the languages that they spoke when you note things like in the census and other records, because that could have an impact on different ways that the name is changed. Especially with Jewish names, you could have, a Hebrew name and a Yiddish name. So there could be a lot of variance of it. So, and especially in terms of the first name. But for the last name, if you can get the last name from the immigration paperwork, that should help you at least be successful in going back. But note that some people might still record the changed name in their trees. So you have to be a little creative with trying both.
Okay, great. All right. Thomas has a question. He wants to know, what level of percentage probability would one tend to believe? You know, in all those pages you showed us, and it said, third cousin, this percentage, fourth cousin, that percentage. What should he be shooting for? What should he believe?
Yeah, so there actually is a tool that I think makes it a little bit easier to understand the relationships. I didn't show it, but it's in your handout. There is a tool called the Centimorgan Explainer on MyHeritage, and that can help you understand possible actual realistic relationships, because you can put in the amount of DNA shared, your age, and the DNA's estimated age, and that helps narrow down the more likely possibilities of relationships. So that might help you to just make sure you're narrowing down. But generally, you find that a lot of those relationships are pretty confident, and I found that a lot of those relationships usually towards the top are usually valid. However, there very much could be cases where someone has a lower probability of a certain relationship, and that's just the accurate one. So you have to probably know a little bit more about that particular side of the family to know for sure if that's the right branch that the DNA came down through, and then maybe use the chromosome browser to confirm that.
Okay, great. All right, Deanna has a question. It's kind of an MPE situation sort of thing. So when you're trying to find a potential father, any tips for picking among candidate brothers?
Yeah, so if you're trying to find a candidate father, ideally what you need to do is you need to identify some descendants of those brothers that may have tested or are willing to test, because sometimes it may come down to amount of numbers. And if you don't know, if you can't rule out any of those brothers based on descendants, then it's really hard to tell specifically which one is which based on that generation. So the best bet is really to try to identify if any of their descendants took a test on any of the other platforms especially, or encourage them to test, and then you could start to rule out. I also like to look at proximity. Where were the possible brothers living or were stationed at the time when the child was conceived? Because there might be cases where you find that someone was completely on the other side of the country or overseas or somewhere else where that wouldn't be possible, or someone died earlier. Then you could start to rule those particular people out as well.
All right, thank you. Let's see. I am just trying to do some research here on the next question. Let's see. So the question it's from Christine, and she wants to know, are all these features included if you upload another company's DNA to MyHeritage?
Yes, but you also need to do the unlock fee, that's called. I believe it's like $29 for MyHeritage, and that's where you get access to all these different features. And then in terms of the viewing the records, you may need an active subscription to view those records.
Okay. So the records being like the historical records.
Exactly. So if
Yep.
you want to look at the vital records and other records, not every one of those is going to be free. So you may be able to see the DNA information, but if you
Right.
want to view the historical records, you may need an active subscription to MyHeritage to really see that, or
Okay.
go through your local library if they have MyHeritage, for
Okay.
example.
And every once in a while, MyHeritage does a promo where they let you upload your DNA for free, and they waive the fee. I think the last time they did that was around Roots Tech.
Yes, they did. Yeah, they waived it for about 2 weeks or so. So
Yeah.
sometimes you will find those promo periods. So that might be something to look forward to, especially when you start looking at around March next year. There'll probably be another one possibly happening. That would be really up to MyHeritage to confirm that. But usually there are different holidays there might be where there's a waive of those fees. But it's definitely worth it. I've used a lot of the different tools over the years, and it's been incredibly helpful, even just for that one-time unlock fee, just to get access to all the tools.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agree. Brian's question is, how far back might the Y-DNA test take you? And what's the difference between the 111 markers and the 700 big Y?
Sure. So Y-DNA and also mitochondrial DNA, it goes back thousands and thousands of years. So it's going to go back to you can get back into sometimes even potentially even early 1100s or even earlier potentially. However, there's not always going to be a paper trail beyond that, but that's at least what it's doing from a scientific standpoint. Now, in terms of the number of markers, I generally recommend that you start with 111 markers. And unless you have a lot of matches at 111 where they're really close and you're needing to split them out further, then that's maybe when you consider doing a big Y to refine it further. A lot of the projects administrators of the groups in places like Family Tree, they will usually advise when there is a need to actually have you upgrade to a higher test. But I generally don't start with a higher test right away. I like to see how many matches do I actually have to work with, and then go from there. Sometimes 111 is all you really need from a genealogy standpoint.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, Melanie. That's going to do it for today. It's been a pleasure having you here. Thanks for joining us and talking about MyHeritage DNA.
Thank you very much. A pleasure to be here.
And thank you to our audience for joining us today. Be sure to check out familytreewebinars.com. The replay will be available there in just a couple hours. And as well, there's lots of other MyHeritage webinars for you to check out. That's going to do it for today. We'll see you at the next MyHeritage webinar, everyone. Bye-bye.